The Hunter kind of leads me to believe that maybe that's not the case.
Absolutely. I think if he has gone for that, though, I really like that strategy, because obviously in Conquest, you only really have to target one deck in particular. Can be a very valid strategy. And one of the ways to tech against an aggressive deck is to put a lot of healing in. But it turns out that that's also very good against Freeze Mage. And so you can kind of expect that your opponent is either going to bring some aggressive decks or Freeze Mage.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of discussion about Freeze Mage, and certainly both of us were a little bit surprised not to see any here tonight.
Absolutely none.
We'll see whether or not these lineups are going to pay dividends here, as both players are going to be kicking things off with those Paladins.
So Greensheep, we can straight away see that he's running the Blue Guild Warrior, which makes me think that this is the very Murloc-heavy version of Paladin. There's also the Consecration in there, which I think Sottle in particular has been extremely angry at people putting Consecration in their aggro Murloc Paladin decks. But against a very board-centric deck like the Paladin from his opponent, it could work out very nicely here.
It certainly could, and we'll see. I mean, Greensheep just playing Greensheep right now, you know? Like, we said it in the intro, what you expect from Greensheep is this aggro. Now, Osha, you can see already putting a very conscious effort into thinking through every scenario, making sure that he's making the correct decision. Now, one thing Osha has been kind of known for here in the Premiership is going a little bit overzealous or letting his emotions take control sometimes. And it was fairly evident last week when he ended up losing 0-3, but it was very clear, like visually on his webcam, that he was very frustrated by the situation. And towards the later stages of the series, he started to make misplays. Now, I believe that that was a lot to do with letting his emotions take control. If he can keep himself in check this week, I firmly believe that he is a very solid player and has the ability to beat a player like Greensheep.
Absolutely. We've seen the players who have qualified before for the later stages in the tournament, both champions in ball control and Jambray already gone, so perhaps this is an omen of his chance to make it through. We can already see that in the early stages of the game, he is very likely to fall behind on board, given that Greensheep has a lot more Murloc synergies in the early game than Osha. However, if you are going to be falling behind on board, Consecration is, and two of them especially, is definitely one of the cards you want to see. The options here from the Discovering the Secret. The Getaway Kodo is obviously the highest value one that you're going to be going for a lot of the time. But in this position, perhaps he was hoping for something like a Noble Sacrifice if he's expecting an incredibly aggressive start from his opponent. In the end, goes for the Redemption. It kind of feels like a lower value but quicker version of the Getaway Kodo. If you can hit something like the Tyrion, perhaps Wicker Flame Burn Bristle, if he's running it in the deck, it can get you a tremendous amount of value. Yeah,
especially with that Divine Shield on Wicker Flame. It's just doubles the value that you get from something like a Redemption. Already the Blue Guild just being dropped here, not trying to hold on to that to combo with a War Leader, not going for anything too crazy, just making sure that he's well and truly in control of the board.
In this situation, having no Getaway Kodos at all because he didn't pick it on the prior one is a little bit... It's not exactly what you'd want, because playing Getaway Kodo on a Hydrologist is a perfectly acceptable situation because it basically gives you a do-over. You're likely to get another Getaway Kodo from when you play it again. But here, just thinking, I will go for the Noble Sacrifice, pray that my opponent has no way of buffing the health on the Murloc, but we can see that this was in fact the case. The fact that Greensheep decided to play the card off the top of his deck rather than the War Leader, potentially tilting Osha a little bit more. He knows that he's a player prone to getting angry, so playing the top deck one, potentially sneaking the mind games in as well.
Certainly could be the case here. And now this hand for Osha, not phenomenal in this scenario. There are a few plays available right now. The Eldor Peacekeeper does make for a value trade available on the board. You could drop that alongside a Redemption, but again, it feels like it could be used for a lot better scenarios. You could squeeze out a lot more value out of that later on in the game. Consecration does mean that you can clear the board completely, but it also gives tempo straight away over to your opponent.
It does indeed. The consecration here, obviously you're not removing very much, and as you said, you're giving opponent free reign to develop what they want onto the board. But because you have two of them, it's potentially going to entice your opponent to overextend on the board, potentially. If they play a few too many cards in the coming turns and you go for an equality and second consecration, that could be absolutely backbreaking to Greensheep's game plan.
So redemption comes down there. Greensheep, I'm not sure, was expecting that to be redemption. I think he was looking for another noble sacrifice there and trying to bait that out with the trade. And now he's in a similar situation to last turn, where he's got a lot of minions that are playable, not so many that he actually wants to play in this scenario. The Peacekeeper might end up being the decision once again, allowing for value trades here. War Leader could come down, but realistically it's just going to be dealt with by this Peacekeeper.
Absolutely. Does play the noble sacrifice, but I think a player seasoned as Osha will know exactly how to play best around the noble sacrifice. Obviously he wants to make the most important to remove minion is the Murloc War Leader, so he's definitely going to be prioritizing that. He now doesn't even have to go for the removal with the Peacekeeper. He can simply equip the True Silver Champion, sorry. And on the following turns, he definitely wants to make sure he has as many minions on board as possible so that you can get the buff effect of Sunkeeper Tarim rather than just the nerf effect on your opponent's minions, because it's unlikely that the Tarim is going to be doing too much devastating against your opponent's board. It's mostly going to be buffing up your own small minions.
Certainly the case. And also, one of the things is when you've got things like Consecration is just one damage out of range of being comboed with Tarim, and you can't fit inequality in that turn as well. So a lot of the time you're going to have to use it more aggressively than defensively. But playing out this turn now, getting the value trades on the board and using that True Silver Champion to finish off the War Leader. And now Osha, with the tempo in his favor, 3-1 on board as well as a weapon. And suddenly Greensheep, not really in the greatest spot ever, is going to just double hero power here, I believe, as he drops the Valfin Inquisitor. Will reset his hero power, and now drops those tiny little tidal hands that just make the most adorable noise.
One of my favourite sounds made in the entirety of Hearthstone. But I think this play is actually stronger than it seems. The fact that there is the Sunkeeper Tarim available next turn for Greensheep means that each of these 1/1s, if they survive, isn't a 1/1, that's a 3/3, which is suddenly a lot of damage pushing towards your opponent and a good amount of board presence and ability to fight back against your opponent's board. Because from what I'm seeing so far, the further the game goes on, the better position Osha is going to be in. Greensheep definitely seems to be doubling down on more of the early game Murlocs, whereas I imagine Osha is probably running more late game cards like Ragnaros Lightlord in his deck that Greensheep might have had to cut to make room for cards like Bluegill Warrior.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a more defensive version of the deck, especially with something like an equality in the hand of Osha. You don't typically see that in aggressive decks as much. You could argue that someone would maybe run one to deal with things like Taunt Warrior, but if you're coming into a conquest planning on banning Warrior, you're not going to run that kind of tech.
Exactly. It's much more important to guarantee that you get a strong early game start, which unfortunately we just did not see from Greensheep. Things very even at this point in the game, both in terms of board presence and cards in hand. And there we can see the card I mentioned, Ragnaros Lightlord, is going to be incredibly powerful later on. Even though there is the ability for Aldor Peacekeeper to come down on it, the 8 heal every turn, be it on a minion or on Osha's hero itself, that is a huge deal.
It's a very difficult mechanic to play around as well, because yes, you can make sure that you're trading and making sure there's lots of targets for him to heal, but at the end of the day, first of all, you can't even guarantee where the heal goes, so it's not like you can perfectly play around it. And second of all, 8 healing per turn, whether it's on minions or face, as you said, is still insanely high value. Just 1 or 2 of those heals activating, as well as a couple of attacks, you've easily paid that 8 mana in value.
Yeah. And I think the way that it's going to work is it's going to come down to a game of chicken. The Greensheep may or may not even know he's playing. If he plays that Sunkeeper Tarim before the Ragnaros Lightlord comes down, it suddenly, as we've said, becomes significantly more difficult to deal with. The Gentle Megasaur now in hand for Greensheep. Even with just 2 Murlocs on board, that is such a high value minion. Even just the 5/4 body for 4 feels perfect. It feels pretty reasonable the majority of the time. And if you can get a really important adapt on all your Murlocs, like perhaps the plants that come as the death rattle, or the extra attack to trade into all your opponent's minions effectively, that feels good.
And the plants as well become even extra valuable when you've got that Sunkeeper Tarim in your hand as well. If you can get that death rattle onto everything, it's basically like you don't even want to clear my board, because the second you do, I am just going to finish the game immediately. And now, Gentle Megasaur found for Osha as well, but unfortunately no Murlocs to play it with.
Exactly. You were too enraptured looking at my beautiful face, I believe, to realise that Osha gave a big sigh there. He is clearly already quite upset that he is getting a Gentle Megasaur while there are absolutely no Murlocs to go along with it. In this position, all of a sudden, Greensheep has the go-ahead to play his Sunkeeper Tarim. He can deal with that Ragnaros Lightlord incredibly well. And speaking of high-value late-game plays, Finja, in its own right, represents so much threat for Greensheep. Such a pickup.
Yeah, Finja just... and as well, I know we keep harking on about it, but Finja with Sunkeeper Tarim guarantees the trade immediately. Guarantees that you're going to pull more Murlocs from your deck. We've already seen he's got blue gills. The War Leader already on the board there. It looks like he is just going to go for Tarim this turn. And with that War Leader, it just means that you automatically win trades. You get that extra HP to be able to just whittle away at anything that's on the board.
Absolutely. The fact that the Murloc War Leader buff is an aura effect and thus goes on top of the fact that Sunkeeper Tarim turns everything into 3/3s feels so fantastic. And even though, as you said, he could have saved the Sunkeeper Tarim to guarantee the fact that Finja kills something, if there's one thing I've learned from playing Hearthstone since Finja came in, is that it just finds a way. Finja always finds a way to kill something. Even if you have to do the most ridiculous trades, you'll make it work.
Yeah, you'll find a way to make it work. And if there's one other thing that I've learned is if there's a War Leader on the board, it's always double Bluegill. And if there's no War Leader, then it's always Bluegill War Leader. That's how Finja works, as far as I can tell. There is the Spike Ridge Steed. Now, we were having a conversation about this card before the broadcast. This card is terrifyingly powerful.
Absolutely. It feels like to Hearthstone as a card what I am to a boyfriend. It's everything you could ever want and more. Thanks for ruining my joke. I mean, I already ruined it myself. But
I don't think you can blame that one on me.
I think you can blame that one on me. However, that is still a fantastic minion to pick up at this, or fantastic card, I should say, sorry, to pick up. It makes it significantly more difficult for the Finja to kill off your Silverhand recruit on the board, which is actually one of the most important parts of it. It's going to go up to 7 health, which means even though the Finja will be able to attack him with the True Silver, that's still not enough. It will have to be the 1/1 Silverhand Murloc in combination with that. So overall, it is actually going to work out that the Spike-Ridged Steeded minion can be killed off, but it's remarkably close.
It certainly is. That True Silver champion saving the day in the end. And the Rockpool Hunter just making things ever so slightly easier as well. It's a nice draw to find. Osha not happy about the situation there as he leans back in dismay. But we'll still have a 2/6 taunt on the board even after this recruit dies. And realistically, this scenario, while you would think Greensheep is significantly ahead, it's actually not that big of a difference in terms of what's in the hands right now. You still got Sunkeeper Tarim, which is a huge game-changing card.
Absolutely, and the fact that there is another Gentle Megasaur in the hand for Osha means that the vast majority of draws in his decks are pretty good. Any Murloc at this point feels perfectly acceptable, and he still has the tremendous power that you can get from cards, especially like Tyrion. But all of a sudden, this is so many Murlocs to hit with the Gentle Megasaur, and just you can go for the living spores. You are then not going to be losing board control for such a long time. You've seen both consecrations from your opponent.
You could even go with Poisonous here. Just basically say, trade with me. I dare you. What are you going to do about it? Like, you can either just allow me to have the board, or you can trade with me and lose everything that you have. And even, I mean, Aldor Peacekeeper theoretically would be a great draw, right? You get some free trades. Not when there's Poisonous minions on the board.
Absolutely. The only minion that will make any difference on is the Gentle Megasaur, and all of a sudden Osha is staring this down and thinking, where on earth did it all go so wrong? I'm supposed to be ahead in this point. I run more value in my deck. but Finja don't give a damn. It's just too powerful of, I don't want to say too powerful of a card, but such powerful of a card at this point in the game, or any point in the game, as soon as you draw it, even though it's less powerful than it is in a lot of decks where you only run the 2 War Leaders and the 2 Bluegill Warriors, so you guarantee yourself a fantastic turn. As we can see here, you just don't care. More board presence is so brilliant.
And just still reeling in the thought of how much value Finja gets when it has poison. Like, you guarantee no matter what. As you said before, Finja finds a way. That is definitely a way of making sure that you're winning out those trades. We'll look to just get as much value as possible in those trades there, and the Peacekeeper will come down onto the 5-4, I would imagine, as well.
Absolutely. It feels like with Finja having poison, he's finally completed his ninja training and is applying poison to his weapons. Am I allowed to roleplay? Is this a role-playing cast? Or
yeah, I mean, roleplay away. You do you. You
Brilliant.
do you. But Osha still holding on to Sunkeeper Tarim right now. He's yet to find a way to really bring that into effect. Basically, he's not been ahead on board yet. And you have to be ahead on board to find an effective use of Sunkeeper Tarim.
Absolutely. If your opponent's minions are middling like this, it basically feels like a 6-mana 3/7 taunt with a slight downside. You're just buffing your opponent's boards. And the fact that there is now poison on every single one of the opponents, of both of the Rockpool Hunters, is very scary. However, that Stonehill Defender represents such a huge amount of value in one card when you're able to find the Paladin legendaries.
Yes, unfortunately. He has not done so. Those 3, while theoretically the Ancient of Blossoms isn't too bad, you know, it's a big hefty taunt. When there's Poison Murlocs on the board, it's basically just a 6-mana 2/3 trade. So really not the greatest of the draws. And as you said, he was definitely looking for those legendaries. If he could have found himself a Tyrion Ford Ring, this is an entirely different story.
Absolutely, because even though it is then still vulnerable to the poison effect on the Rockpool Hunters, getting the 5/3 weapon is so important in fighting back against this board, because then you can simply chop away the poisonous cards, but it doesn't really make too much of a difference when another Gentle Megasaur is picked up for Greensheep. That has to just be the best card in his deck.
Goodness.
+3 health.
Yeah, just getting the health to get those trades is easily the best option. It means that these poison minions don't even die to these trades now. And I think this game is all but over. Looks like Greensheep is going to be going 1-0 up in this series. I realize I'm calling that before it's happened, but I'm struggling to think of a way that Osha finds his way back in here.
That is one half of a way for him to find his way back in here. I was not expecting him, if I'm honest, to be running the Wild Pyromancers. Most versions of the mid-range deck have opted to cut it. Perhaps it's just a one-off, but if he can find that second equality, it does give him a chance. That is his only out. However, as a caster, I'm terrible at maths and so forgot to add up lethal here. Is this simply it? Apparently not.
No.
Remarkably close.
It is very close. 2 away on this one. He's going to stay in the game. It
chance
would have been
there.
1 away if he hadn't gone for the trade as well. Primordial Drake, not quite enough.
So close. One of the best cards he could find at this point.
Do you know, the turning point of that entire game was just getting poison on those Murlocs. Like, there was no way for Osha to deal with that. No matter what threat he dropped, no matter... There was no way for him to contest the board in terms of numbers because he just simply couldn't play enough cards in one turn. And when it came to dropping bigger threats, instant trade for any of those Murlocs. There were 4 available as well. It's just such a frustrating situation for him to deal with.
Absolutely. Giving it a cursory glance, I just instantly thought, you got to go with the plants. It's often such a fantastic card to get when you are fighting so hard for board control. But when you know your opponent is going to be playing more high-value minions than yours, be it Sunkeeper Tarim, Ragnaros Light Lord, or even a Spike Ridge Steeded minion, getting the poison, as we saw, was so important, and it absolutely won him the game, that single decision.
Yeah, and suddenly from that point on, since all the AoE had already been used as well, it was just like, what can you really do to get back in at that point? There was the Stonehill Defender, the last ray of hope, but didn't really find what he was looking for. And now, Druid and Rogue are going to be the decks remaining for Greensheep that he's got to finish off this series with. I say finish off, he's only 1-0 up so far, so Osha still well and truly in the running on this one. And we'll see what he's going to bring to this one. Looks like he's decided to change up decks, going for an Elemental Shaman. But Greensheep looking like he's going with one of the decks that he took to Insomnia, this Token Druid.
This is an incredibly powerful deck that seemed to be so dominant on the ladder in recent days because of the prevalence of Quest Rogue. It's an incredibly powerful deck in that particular matchup, but significantly less powerful against the Elemental Shaman. The amount of board clears that are available are so devastating because you absolutely 100% have to have board control if you want to win as the Druid. There's basically no effects that you can get. There's no direct damage to face outside of potential charges from the Bluegill Warriors or swipes if you put that in your deck, but it's severely limited. So cards like Lightning Storm are absolutely the bane of your existence.
They certainly are, and when you're going to have definitely Lightning Storms in here, definitely Maelstrom Portals as well, and then Calamals to top it all off. There is a lot of ways for Osha to deal with hefty boards. Now, a decent start for Greensheep, and this is one of the best things in this deck, is running that Corsair means that you instantly get a 2-2 charge, assuming that you have a Mark of the Lotus on that turn 2. It can be devastating to your opponent. But you know what the worst possible thing to see when you've just played that is?
Tell me.
Is it a Tar Creeper?
It's one of the worst. It's definitely up there. There is the opportunity for Greensheep here, though, to capitalize on the fact that he has 3 minions on board already at this point in the game. He could go for Savage Roar and sacrifice off one of his minions in order to push more damage to face. Or he could go for the Power of the Wild if he's not expecting a Maelstrom Portal from his opponent. He would leave his minions very, very weak, but then the potential to follow up with a Savage Roar would be so much damage to push forward. And now that he's got the Living Mana, even after his board if his board is cleared by a potential board clear like Lightning Storm, he's got the refill. That's one of the most important cards to get, if not the most important card to get after your opponent clears the board.
Yeah, I'm looking to make sure that he's being effective with those trades there as well. Obviously, he loses 1 damage in that scenario, but it means that his minions are that little bit tankier. If just a naked Lightning Storm comes down with no spell power, it means that neither of these minions are guaranteed to die in that scenario. Hungry Crab going to come down and he's just going to buff everything once again to make sure that he can continue to push this damage on through. And that Living Mana, would not be at all surprised to see him save that for after a big AoE's come down.
Very interesting as well, I want to point out that Osha hasn't even had to play the Lightning Storm, has had the opportunity to simply play Taunts 3 turns in a row. And it means that he can use the attack on his Taunt minions to buff up, to just to take off some of the health value from his opponent's minions and then follow up with a guaranteed clear with the Lightning Storm. That pickup there of the Mark of Yasharaj is incredibly powerful for Greensheep. Any card he can take, he would be very, very happy with.
11 HP remaining already for Osha at this stage. Not a fun scenario. He's going to pray for the Wrath of Air before dropping a Lightning Storm. He's not going to find it, but can still deal with all but 1 minion if he manages to get the 3 onto the Crab.
Absolutely, this is a straight up 50-50 on that one. Does hit it. Definitely more impactful than it would be in some matchups, because even the most unassuming of minions can be so devastating in the aggro Druid. But Greensheep not too upset about it, because he has the perfect turn 5 play in Living Mana. This is devastating.
The ultimate kind of refill play, the recharge play, as it were. You see that AoE come down and basically just say to them, look, you don't have any more AoE. If you do play it, I get all of my mana back and nothing ever happened. If you don't, I win the game. Like, it's the ultimate what are you going to do about it card.
Exactly, and in this situation, Greensheep deciding to use the Innovate for the hero power, a lot of the time you would simply save it to use a Savage Roar on the following turn if you pick it up, because you will obviously only be left with 1 mana. But in this situation, he realized if these stick around, you've won the game. No point to save it, because it's either over or the game carries on and you're in an unfavorable spot anyway.
Yeah, certainly correct decision there, and correct decisions after correct decisions have meant that Greensheep is now 2-0 in this series. Off to a stonkingly good start right there. And now Rogue remaining for him. Whether or not this is Quest or Miracle Rogue, that's going to be the question on everyone's lips right now. Honestly, I could see him bringing either, but I would be I would be expecting it to be Quest Rogue, I think, with Greensheep and the style that he likes to play.
I would definitely agree with you, and if it does turn out to be Quest Rogue, I think that's going to be pretty favourable for him, because we've seen that the Paladin deck in particular from Osha was the slower variant that doesn't run as many aggro Murloc cards in the early game, so the potential to simply smork your opponent out of the game before they get that quest complete is significantly reduced, and it turns out that cards in the late game like Ragnaros Lightlord are just not that good against when you have that much damage coming towards you.
Yeah, it's definitely... I mean, one of the terrifying situations is when you get to that late game, if there's just too much pressure. But we'll have to wait and see. Here, it is going to be that Quest Rogue. Wisp in the deck here. Not something that I've seen a huge amount of, but definitely there's certain logic to going with that. It means that even without Shadow Steps, you can still instantly play that card again.
I think the main reason that people have put Wisps in is that they realised quite early on that Vanish is fantastic in this deck, and Wisps are fantastic with Vanish. Even if you're utilising all your mana with the Vanish, be it with or without prep, being able to play something out for 0 mana, even if it's before the quest, is fantastic.
It certainly is, and if you can combo something like that with the gadgets of Ferryman as well, instant value. It's like being able to play multiple Shadow Steps beyond the 2 that you actually get in the deck when it's on something like that Wisp.
Are you saying that the Wisp is infinite value?
I'm saying that Wisp is infinite value, actually the best card in Hearthstone.
Learn something new every day.
There you go. I actually think that Faceless Manipulator is the best card in Hearthstone because it has the potential to be any other card.
Can you remind me what rank you are at the moment?
Like rank 5 EU.
Wow, impressive. I thought you meant non-legend. Clearly, I was mistaken.
Yeah, definitely not, definitely not. It's going to be the Ferryman coming down this turn to bring that Stone to Spore back to hand. So Greensheep nominating which minion he's going to be looking to replicate this game.
Absolutely, and already has those crucial 3 bounce effects in hand. Both Ferryman and a Shadow Step means this quest is going to be completed incredibly quickly. And that's looking like it's going to be a pretty important factor, as this is a very fast start for Osha given the caliber of his deck. Usually going to be going a little bit slower, but getting a lot of his Murlocs early on. If he can find a Murloc War Leader, this is such a high amount of damage to push forward.
So now we look at once again these decisions on which secret to take as the Paladin. Getaway Coda, as you mentioned before, just phenomenal value on that card, so long as you're getting the right cards back into your hand again. But Noble Sacrifice is the other one that's kind of the vast majority of scenarios, it's going to be good.
Yeah, most certainly. The Noble Sacrifice is going to be good, I would imagine, either before or after the quest. Before the quest is completed, it is used purely to protect your minions, but after the quest comes down, it can be used to absorb 5 damage, which could be the difference between giving you the time to finish off your opponent or not. And here we can see Greensheep just carrying on. His sole mission here is to complete that quest as fast as possible, and we could see it being completed on turn 5, and also with potentially a few minions on board. Having said that, however, Osha has plenty of ways to keep his opponent's board nice and clear.
He certainly does. Now, Consecration obviously available in the hand right now. Feels maybe overzealous to commit that immediately, but he knows that obviously 2 boars have been played. He only needs 1 more bounce in the hand for Greensheep to know that that quest is coming very shortly, and will immediately commit that AoE. Just try and remove as many threats from the board so that as and when that quest is completed, if there's like a prep in hand, for example, and it's able to happen this next turn, suddenly he's in a very bad scenario if there are minions on the board.
Most certainly. I definitely like him going for the value trades there in combination with the Consecration to make sure that these 3 minions can keep on attacking face. We're getting closer and closer to that Spike Reach Steed as well, which is actually a tremendously good card in this matchup. It pushes forward more damage and more resilient damage, and also denies the amount of damage your opponent can push towards your face significantly after the quest comes down. And it does most certainly look like we are going to see quest on turn 5. Osha shaking his head, mouthing something which I will not repeat on stream.
Yeah, certainly not a happy chappy right now, but also not livid with anger either. He certainly seems to be keeping his cool in this scenario. Now again, 3 actually very good secrets. I'd argue 3 of the best secrets available to Osha right now. And deciding which one to go with. I feel like Noble Sacrifice, as you mentioned earlier, just being able to block some of that incoming damage, especially when you know that the quest is about to come into play, just protecting yourself a little bit better seems like the best option.
Absolutely. I think the Getaway Coder is probably not the pick here because you're probably not going to have time to get out that value, getting a minion back in your hand. Redemption probably would have been the pick over the Getaway Coder. However, as you've mentioned, the Noble Sacrifice, really powerful at denying a hit from one of your opponent's 5/5s. So we do have the potential here to see a quest completion, and that is absolutely what Greensheep is going to go for. It would seem. I suppose he can get the Crystal Core in his hand and not play it, but if you're going to go with this line of play, getting the 5/5 now to start denying some of the damage from your opponent, and then on the following turn, you have ways to fight back against the board with 2 charges, and you also have a way to refill your hand with the Mimic Pod. If you could find a Wisp off of that, that's not only infinite value, that's 2 times infinite value.
Double infinite. We've created a maths phenomenon. But Spike Ridge Steed is definitely going to be a nice little find here for Osha. That is a card that really saves his skin in this scenario. It means that not only can he trade away this boar without removing multiple minions, it also means that the next turn, Greensheep, as much as he wants to commit to the board, it has to deal with these hefty taunts.
The Wicker Flame Burn Bristle kind of making things a little bit less obvious for Osha though, because if you are able to stick that Spike Ridge Steed on the Wicker Flame, it is so fantastic, because then you are obviously getting 4 health back whenever it is attacked into or attacks into something else. But given the fact that it has Taunt, it would likely die off before you get the chance to play the Spike Ridge Steed on it anyway. So going for it right now makes a lot of sense, and then you just start plowing to face. You need to finish off your opponent right now.
And I think part of the reason as well that he's not going for that line of play onto the Wicker Flame is, first of all, it seems like a fantastical play, right? It seems too good to be true. And second of all, you're on 27 HP, so that extra healing really isn't significant in this scenario anyway. So just deciding to get the value out of that Spike Ridge Steed while he can, and just pushing a lot more damage to face. Now, this is a lot of damage on the board right now for Greensheep, but all 4 hits, or at least 3 of them, are going to be blocked, as that dagger will finish off 1 damage away from lethal right now. Osha with an opportunity, but can he find the remaining damage?
Stonehill Defender doesn't do it. I don't think there's any cards he can get right now to finish it off. He had so many outs. Rockpool Hunter, Murloc Warleader, True Silver Champion, Consecrate. So many things would have given him that 1 extra damage. With these options, Dirty Rat is obviously fantastic before your opponent completes the quest, but afterwards, significantly less so. Wicker Flame Burn Bristle I absolutely like, because it's going to delay your opponent in 2 ways. It's going to absorb at least 2 hits, and it's going to heal you up at the same time. And all Osha needs to do is just have more time. He needs 1 thing to stick on the board, or even then, he just needs to pray that he draws the True Silver or the Consecration.
Yeah, still ways for him to win, even if this board is completely dealt with. Right now, he can take 5 hits on the board, 6 if you include the Noble Sacrifice as well. Doomsayer's coming out here, but not quite going to be early enough on this one. That Glacial Shard will be able to freeze the last remaining minion, though.
Absolutely. It's unfortunate that it would seem that Greensheep isn't going to be able to clear everything off the board with just his minions, because then he could freeze the face and deny the potential out of the True Silver Champion. But as you said, in this position... Oh, was that just no way to clear the board?
No way to clear the board, because the dagger was what we were counting in, and he's only got 1 HP, so can't actually trade those away, which means Osha is still in this series. The Quest Rogue could be the downfall of Greensheep. It's 2-1 right now. We'll see how well that Quest Rogue is going to fare against the other decks that Osha is bringing to this table. Osha certainly looked like he felt that he was having an unfair go of it in that matchup, especially when the quest was activated fairly early on into the matchup. But things turned out pretty okay for him.
That was a fantastic victory for him, because that was a crucial victory. I even pointed out earlier that the Quest Rogue would have a really nice matchup against that slower Murloc Paladin, but he got the cards he needed earlier on to pressure his opponent, and that is pretty much the only way you are going to be winning that matchup. And now looking at his remaining decks, he has the Hunter and the Shaman. I imagine the Hunter is probably going to be his saving grace here. You have the potential, and he's lining up right away to get incredibly aggressive starts in the early game. If you can hit something like Alley Cat into Scavenging Hyena, all of a sudden, that's such a scary minion to start attacking into face. And with this rogue running nothing like sap, and very often not even eviscerate, it's so hard to deal with it.
Also, the Kindly Grandmother, a phenomenal early game pickup as well. Just such a difficult minion to deal with, as it will come back as that 3-2. It's like, you don't want to deal with that minion because it comes back bigger and stronger.
Exactly.
The kill command I would expect to be removed from this mulligan. Do you consider keeping the hyena, or do you just want to look for your 1-drops?
So it's a real gamble, because if you do manage to hit one of your 1-drops, it's such a good minion to have. But if you don't, it's only a 2-2 for 2, which just really doesn't feel nice at all. So I would be very unsurprised to only keep the Kindly Grandmother and toss back both the other minions. However, he believes he wants to hit one of those 1-drops and absolutely misses.
It's a swing and a miss there for Osha. Kindly Grandmother off the top is not what he's looking for there. Unfortunate scenario, but I can understand the mentality with that mulligan though, because it's kind of like a, if I get this, I win the game straight up. Like, I'm 100% back in the series, and I'll push it to 2-2. Doesn't find it in the end, but also considering the deck that he's likely running here, turn 2 start is still very good. You're still very aggressive. You're still actually on it 1 turn too late with the alley cutters. Very unfortunate. Now it feels like Kindly Grandmother is the play that has to be made.
Absolutely. I think I do just want to point out at this point, I know Manan's watching, and I just want to point out to her, whenever I say Kindly Grandmother, I'm sadly not complimenting you, so I do have to apologise. But as you said, the alley cat is drawn 1 turn too late. The Scavenging Hyena lines up pretty nicely against this Firefly, as it means you're very likely to be seeing a hero power from your opponent on the next turn, which slows them down quite significantly. And then you can start to capitalize with your powerful minions. You can go 1-drop, 2-drop on this turn if you think that would be more powerful than what you're going to get from Animal Companion. Because if you get Leok from Animal Companion, it feels pretty rough. You'd definitely rather have stuff on the board and then follow up with it. Grievous Bite is probably going to be a pretty weak card in this matchup. It's only going to get any value at all, I would assume, before the quest is completed, and he'd definitely rather have just some other threat to stop pushing towards his opponent's face.
In this scenario, though, as of right now, it's not too much of an issue. It's just later on when he'd rather have something to play on turn 4, something to play on turn 5, something to play on turn 6, so that he can actually fill out this curve over the next few turns. A second 1-drop to play alongside an Animal Companion next turn would have been a perfect find for him.
It would indeed, really considering how he wants to play this, and in the end just goes for the on-curve play of Animal Companion. Misha, not too bad of a result at all. He would have been most happy, I would assume, with Huffer, just because it gives you damage immediately. But then again, you're then leaving yourself quite open to a South Sea deckhand charging in and just finishing it off. And it is going to be frozen, but that is still something on board. Eventually, your opponent is not going to be able to freeze it anymore, and then you start pushing a very respectable amount of damage.
You say eventually he's not going to be able to. He's got 2 Glacial Shards in hand, as well as a Shadow Step, so I think that Misha is going to stay very cold for a very long time in this game. Poisonous, Summon Plants, and Stealth are going to be the options available right now. Living Spore seems pretty good.
Stealth until your next turn. What minion did he actually target with this? I imagine because he played the Grandmother first, he's probably pointing it at that minion. Yeah, that does seem what he went for. But it was worth considering that if he put the Stealth on the Misha, it can't be frozen on that turn. But the going for the plants here makes a lot of sense. It's more aggression that you can push towards your opponent's face, and also just more ways to fight back against the board, because the Rogue is doing a surprisingly good job of keeping up here.
Now, unfortunately for us, for our entertainment value, Greensheep's game plan this game is not just to freeze Misha unlimited times. He's actually trying to activate a quest that's going on right now called Crystal Core. Believe it or not, it's actually called the Caverns Below, but the item is called Crystal Core. Oh. And playing this turn as he has meant that now he has that quest to activate next turn. Wouldn't be surprised to see the Novice Engineer just dropped here as well, just to finish off his turn and make sure that he's cycling through getting as many minions available as possible. And suddenly, this Grievous Bite doesn't look so bad.
Absolutely. I was going to say that the Crystal Core is obviously fantastic whenever you play it, but when you have a board full of minions, it feels amazing. And oh my goodness, that gives a real choice here to Osha. He has the potential to go for Grievous Bite, but he also has the potential to just put down the Knife Juggler and pray to RNGesus that these alley cats do their work.
I believe in the power of our Jesus right now. Ali Cat into Nitro. Look at Greensheep's face, rolling his eyes there. Can't believe what he's seeing, and he gets the 2-2-1s.
Perfect knives.
Unfortunately, though, he would have been able to. It would have been nice to get one onto the 2-3 so that Groover Spike could finish that minion off.
Fair point.
But it is going to mean that he can't quite finish the board as it stands right now, but it does leave it onto just one minion remaining.
I like cashing in the value while you can, and now there is only one minion that is going to be buffed up to a 5-5. Going to be a much stronger turn on the following turn, obviously, for Greensheep. And there is always that trick up his sleeve of the Vanish. If the board gets too scary for Osha, he can just pull everything back to hand. And unless Osha kills off his kindly grandmother here, that will even deny the value from the plants that come off of it. But here we can see just loading up with everything he can on the board. The Jeweled Macaw gives the Gentle Megasaur. Unfortunately not going to be too good here because there are no Murlocs in this deck.
And just going to slam as much damage as possible to the face of Greensheep, looking to try and pressure out this game and finish things off. However, as you rightly mentioned last turn, Vanish now available looks like the optimum play in this scenario. You could fill the board with 5/5s if you wanted. It is also an option, but I feel like with a terrifying board like this, you have to go with the Vanish.
Absolutely. You know that no matter what your opponent does on their next turn, it's not going to be a board as threatening as it was on this turn. So you Vanish on this turn, and then on the next turn you can finish off with the charges you have in the South Sea deckhand. I don't believe we've seen a patches yet either, so that would be really nice to push another 5/5 charger and really start to fight back against this board.
Now, not all is not lost for Osha at this stage, as he can just fill the board with beasts once again and knife juggle each and every single time. Kill command in the hand, as well as that hero power. There is still a lot of damage available for Osha. This is still very much a game that he can win out.
It most certainly is, and this is where any deck that doesn't run heal becomes vulnerable to Hunter. No matter how insane of an early game you have, if Hunter is able to get in, even just as we've seen here, something like 15 damage, you can then start to pressure them with your hero powers and hopefully finish them off from there. It seems like it's probably not worth it to go for the Hunter hero power here over a minion, because it's only going to end up being one more damage with the obvious knife coming out.
And if you play Kindly Grandmother and the Knife Juggler doesn't die before the Death Rattle procs, you actually get the same damage as your hero power anyway. But the Knife Juggler easily paying its mana value right there as he gets 5 hits to face. Essentially a kill command as well as dropping a minion on the board.
Absolutely, and this is a really nice board to have against the Rogue, because any mid-sized minions, if you develop 2 or 3 medium minions, this would have been easy for Greensheep to just slam his 5/5 charges against. But all of a sudden, this is looking very scary on Greensheep's side. He has 30 damage represented on board. So Osha is going to have to kill Greensheep or heal on this turn. Well, not heal, sorry, remove minions on this turn.
It also has that Nesting Rock to drop a taunt to try and roadblock his way to victory here. Also, the Buzzard could come into play by some crazy methods, but 4 damage on board, 5 from kill command as well as the hero power with a crackling Razor Maw. This could be
plus 3 damage. Does it close out the game? Oh,
not quite enough. Poisonous doesn't feel too bad though.
Yeah, obviously the ability to take out one of these 5/5s nice and cleanly feels fantastic. Feels very sad in this situation that these are beasts and not Murlocs. I hate to hurt your feelings, cute cats, but I wish you were fishes in this situation.
Who doesn't? Who doesn't? Scaled friends for life, I believe, is the phrase. Nesting Rock, I think, is the play that you have to go for here. Obviously, there's 25 damage on board right now, so you have to get that taunt out there. Just protect yourself. Yeah. And there's the option to trade into the 5/3, but I think in this scenario, you are never going to you're never going to outvalue your opponent, so you've just got to try and race them.
I think you are absolutely correct in that. You just have to finish them off as quickly as possible. And so all Osha needs in this situation is for 3 damage to stick. But I imagine Greensheep is going to be clocking on with the fact that Osha went face there, that there has to be a kill command in hand. He's drawn a fair amount of cards, and so that is a very likely situation to occur. He has the ability to clear off, I believe, enough damage here with the Stone Tusk Boar to keep him alive. And once again, this is just so close to Osha. We saw in the last game he was able to just crawl over the finish line. But maybe it's just just not quite enough here. This is so much damage staring him down.
Yeah, still 25 damage to come on through here. Regrettably for Greensheep, he's 1 damage away from just finishing that game if he had 1 more minion to finish off this taunt with. But not quite enough. Can leave Osha on 4 HP if he just decided to go face, but obviously he knows that he has to deal with the board state that is been built up by Osha.
And interestingly enough, the fact that Osha made the decision to send the 3 cats to face rather than taking out the South Sea deckhand is having massive repercussions at this point. The Eagle Hormo picked up, closes out
Greensheep just threw the game. If he killed that, the kill command doesn't do enough damage. Why? Why would you do all of those trades but not finish off the last trade? Terrible mistake coming out there with the Eagle Horn bow. That is going to be enough to end this game. Osha stays in this series. It is 2-2. I cannot believe what we just witnessed there.
I don't believe it. Pinch me, please. I must be dreaming. That was insane.
There you go, mate. Are you awake now? Are you with us once again?
Where am I?
You're at the ESL studio in Leicester. But that was a ridiculous... I'm really surprised he didn't go for that trade after doing all of the other trades, ticking all of the other boxes. This is how I have to win the game, and then leaving the beast on the board to activate kill command just seems like a cardinal sin to me.
Absolutely. He was just praying. I think he did the maths and realized that just kill command and hero power didn't close out the game. Was it right? How much health?
It didn't quite. I think there was like 2 left at that point.
Okay, so he realized that there had to be some additional source of damage, but it felt like there were so many minions on the board there, and any kind of bounce effect would have guaranteed a closeout for Greensheep. So perhaps playing a little bit more cautiously and clearing off his opponent's board would have been the safer play.
I think a good way to think about it would have just been, what does he do to clear my board? Like, how do I lose next turn if I go for these trades? Realistically, I think the answer is you don't. So maybe could have played that a little bit more carefully, and he might end up losing this series because of it. It is now 2-2. Elemental Shaman here for Osha up against this Quest Rogue for Greensheep. So far, this Quest Rogue has been the bane of Greensheep.
It has indeed, but I think, if I'm correct, it is going to be the bane of Osha in this matchup. It can be very difficult to win against this deck. You obviously have extremely limited aggressive options in the early game, and it feels like even when you're going into the late game, you have options like Volcano to clear out a potential 3 5/5 minions on 1 turn, but it's just not going to be enough. There's just very often so much recharge from the Miracle Rogue. However, this is looking like, or from the Quest Rogue, sorry. It's feeling like a situation where Greensheep is in a significantly less favourable position to complete the quest on turn 5. Only has 1 bounce effect. And obviously the Igneous Elemental does give you the 2 Flame Elementals, but you can't bounce back the Igneous Elemental. You can only bounce back the Flame Elementals. So he's still 1 more minion of the same name away from completing the quest.
Yeah, so really good scenario to start this game off for Osha. Just having a little bit of a delay on the quest road could be enough for him to stay in this one. Things like Blaze Caller are phenomenal in this matchup. Being able to immediately deal with one of your opponent's 5/5s and also drop a body that is difficult for your opponent to deal with without actually hitting with face, which, you know, that 6 damage can be the difference between a win or a loss. There's a lot of scenarios where later on in the game, if you can weather the storm, this Elemental Shaman can come into its own.
Absolutely, and I think one of the main things that is going to be working in Osha's favour here is the fact that he is running the full package of Elementals. You can obviously just run a few Elementals and then Servant of Kalamos and Kalamos, but the Blaze Caller, as you said, the Fire Elemental, massively threatening minions to play in the mid-game to start pushing back to kill your opponent if we don't see an early quest completion. The Vanish does mean that there are all the pieces in Greensheep's hand needed to complete the quest, but that's quite a long way away. 6 mana is an awful lot to commit on 1 turn.
It certainly is. Osha thinking long and hard about this turn. Now, instantly, most players would think, okay, Tar Creeper, great, you know, turn 3 Tar Creeper. However, you play that Tar Creeper, you give your opponent Greensheep the opportunity to get those Flame Elementals into his hand. That's exactly what he needs to start to build up towards his quest. If you play around that, if you just drop a totem or something similar, you can find yourself in a much better scenario in a couple of turns. Looks like Tar Creeper may be the play regardless.
You definitely know that eventually those Flame Elementals are going to be killed off. A second Vanish, though, picked up for Greensheep. If Osha was going to take this game, it would be through these pretty mediocre draws from Greensheep.
Certainly right. Mimic Pod just going to be used to try and find something. He figures with both Vanishes gone, he's got to find something nice, and that is a pretty tasty draw for him.
It is indeed. Has now more than enough minions to, or bounce effects to complete the quest. So looking like we could see it on turn 6 potentially, or maybe turn 7 if it takes it a little bit slower. And then as soon as that quest is completed, all of these AoE options seem significantly less threatening for Osha. It often feels like at that point it comes down to whether you can roll the Wrath of Air Totem, because then the combination of Maelstrom Portal and Lightning Storm can completely clear any amount of 5/5s guaranteed. And now in this spot, you can just go with the Jinyu Water Speaker to heal onto your Tar Creeper. It does mean that you are overloading for 1, but you'd definitely rather be able to play the Fire Elemental on 5, so it's not the most devastating turn to overload on. Or on turn 6, sorry.
Yeah. Now, I mean, you may... Technically, you can play on turn 5.
Yes.
With the coin in hand, that is obviously an option next turn. Dropping a second Tar Creeper would allow you to do that, or trading alongside a Maelstrom Portal, also an option. But realistically, how much that Jinyu's healing is going to make a difference in this matchup will wait to be seen. Maelstrom Portal will come out in the end. Just looking for board control right now. The Alley Cat has served Osha well in this series, and it's going to rejoin him once more.
Coming back for a victory lap, if you will, to flaunt its greatness, even though it is the vastly inferior of the cats. Can now play the Flame Elemental and bounce it back, but unfortunately doesn't quite have enough mana to play it and bounce it again. And given this is the only Flame Elemental left, he definitely wants to protect it as much as he can, so won't be playing it in this situation. And then this is once again not a particularly threatening turn from Greensheep, so it will then give Osha the potential to start to push back against the board. Fire Elemental is a potential on the following turn, perfectly lines up against this Gadgets and Ferryman, and then you start pushing the real damage once you have that Fire Elemental on board.
Yeah, and you start to demand from the Quest Rogue that he plays the quest basically immediately, or he's going to start to lose the game. Now, obviously, there isn't a huge amount of immediate damage. It is gradual damage that's going to be coming out from Osha. There's 3 to 5 every turn coming out from the Fire Elemental and the Blaze Caller. But if you play the Fire Elemental on this turn, you have to wait an extra turn before you get that Blaze Caller out anyway. So it's just going to be slowly but surely taking control of the board, taking control of the game. But do not believe for a second that Greensheep is out of this one just yet.
Absolutely. One rather interesting thing I want to point out, though, is this is the kind of going to demonstrate the power and weakness of Tolvir Stoneshaper in one turn. Obviously, it's remarkably powerful at protecting the Fire Elemental and allowing it to go phase, but it also breaks the Elemental chain. You are then unable to go for the Blaze Caller on the following turn. So perhaps the line of play here is to go for the Tar Creeper, but then you can't go with the Lightning Storm with it, because that still denies you the value of Blaze Caller, because then you are overloaded instead. But maybe you just take that sacrifice and you don't go with the Blaze Caller on the next turn, because clearing this board feels pretty crucial given that the Crystal Core is now in hand.
Yeah, on 6 isn't the worst thing in the world, but as you rightly mentioned before, would mean that that Blaze Caller no longer activated. There's a few different decisions that Osha has to make in this one, and one of them is how he goes about clearing away this board. That Lightning Storm certainly feels like the best option available to him in terms of that, and then you can just play that alongside the Tar Creeper. As you said, the Blaze Caller would be available the next turn, but with Aya in hand, that's no longer the end of the world. Exactly.
You still have powerful plays, but the worst thing is that your mana just doesn't quite work out. If you go for the Lightning Storm on this turn, which really does feel like quite a necessity, all of a sudden you have 5 mana on the following turn. You can't quite fill it out, and it feels like you're going to have to be pushing as much stuff on the board each turn if you want to close out this game, because the Tar Creepers are fantastic defensive options, but are pushing very little damage towards your opponent.
So now Crystal Core will come down, and it's time for Greensheep to start to get some vengeance on this board, start to actually build up a presence for himself. He can't do as much as he would have liked, but there's an extra Divine Shield taunt to play with here with the Jade Lightning. in the hand here for Osha, as well as a Blaze Caller. He has a lot of direct damage if he can consistently start to just hit face, but again, the biggest issue is lack of elementals.
Exactly. Once again, demonstrating the fact that Tolvir Stoneshaper isn't an elemental is such a downside. It feels like if you compare the elemental package to the dragon package, the fact that cards like the Corruptor, the Blackwing Corruptor, wasn't a dragon didn't feel quite so bad, because you can just have one high mana cost dragon in your hand and still activate all the effects. Whereas Tolvir Stoneshaper, you have to play an elemental every single turn to keep the train rolling.
And one of the things about the Elemental Shaman is it is so reliant on an early Firefly. If you can get the Firefly early and you can just weave in the Fire Elementals on the turns that you know that next turn you want to get that value out, if you can then make sure that you're kind of chaining up your Elementals nicely so they activate each other, suddenly you have near infinite value from this deck. However, in these kind of scenarios, that just doesn't happen.
This is the real pushback onto the board by Greensheep. He plays the Vanish because, once again, he knows that whatever his opponent does on the following turn, it won't be anywhere near as scary as what he has incrementally developed over the past few turns. And now he is making his opponent incredibly scared, because he is he's almost threatening lethal on the following turn, because he can simply attack face with both of his minions, bounce them back twice, and deliver 21 damage, and then potentially more on the following turn with the Vanish. And even though, as I said at the start of the game, both Vanishes were pretty rough, at this stage in the game, they are absolutely fantastic.
They certainly are. You have that excess mana to keep on ploughing minions to board after you've played the Vanish. Now, there is still a lot of damage available for Osha. He has that Fire Elemental, the Jade Lightning, the Blaze Caller, assuming that he can activate that on the turn before. But it's whether or not he thinks he can actually survive long enough to get away with that one. Certainly, one line of play could be dropping things like the Jade Lightning along with a Firefly, and maybe just go for a Totem and hope for a taunt. It certainly doesn't feel like a very nice line of play, though.
Yeah, nothing here really feels too good, though. So as we can see, he's clearly just going for the all-out aggressive approach. He has played an elemental on this turn, so he has the potential for 5 burst damage to face with the Blaze Caller on the following turn. So maybe he's thinking he can just get a little bit more damage into face and finish off his opponent. We saw from the last game that Greensheep doesn't really respect the potential of burst a lot of the time, as he basically conceded a victory there at the end by leaving the one last cat alive. And maybe the cat will be the defining creature once again.
This cat has been Osha's best friend so far in this series. Now, it's still very possible for Osha to win this one out. Now, Greensheep has 10 damage on board right now. With the Shadow Step and the Vanish, he can turn that into 20 if he so pleases, if he so wishes, sorry. In fact, with the... Wait, does he not have...
Just lethal?
Yeah,
Shadow Step.
with the Brewmaster as well.
It.
So he can actually finish this game off. I was just counting it. I was like, wait a second. He's already won the game. What am I talking about? He can just slam that patches in multiple more times.
Yeah, BMing a little bit with the playing of these minions out here. Just wants to... Oh, this is just... Oh, wait. Does he not have lethal?
Oh, he didn't. Oh, he didn't. He was 1 mana away, actually.
We were right the first time.
This is why casters shouldn't be maths.
Oh yeah, I'm finally starting to realise. Burns a card there at the end, but that really doesn't feel like too much of a downside. You really just need to be playing as defensively as possible, and you have defensive options in hand. Double Tolvir Stoneshaper is pretty nice because it gets such a high amount of just taunt up, especially as the Divine Shield might even absorb a 5 from one of them, and then you can play the Elemental in addition to that in the Firefly, so that you have the potential to go for Blaze Caller on the following turn, hoping that that will be the little bit of extra damage you need to finish off your opponent. But it feels like if Greensheep plays his cards right here, he won't even have to put himself in that position.
There's a Doomsayer, but it feels like too little too late at this stage. Novice Engineer searching for more charges to finish this game off. Finding plenty of ways to look for things. Whether or not he'll find what he needs. The Shadow Step is definitely what he needed on this one. Happy to take a little bit of damage to face so that he can slam this patches in 3 times in a row. with those shadow steps. That is going to be all she wrote for this series. And it's going to be all she wrote for Osha's run in the Premiership. A 2-0 start, but finishing the group stages 2-3. And for the first time ever, Greensheep is going to be moving on into our playoff stage of the tournament.
Fantastically done for him. It almost felt like he would be in the same position that Osha has been in throughout the entire tournament within this series. He was up 2-0. He looked to be in a fantastic spot to take this series, but it came down to a real nail-biter, not just from within the series, but also within that one game. So devastating for Osha, though.
Yeah.
Once again, so close to getting out of this stage in the tournament, but just pipped at the final post.
Especially with how that last game went as well. It felt like, because of the bad start Greensheep had, it felt like Osha maybe could hold on to things and push it into a victory, but unfortunately not quite able to in the end, and it does mean that